The rain pounded against the mud-slick trails of Montana's remote Bitterroot Valley as a group of masked men moved silently through the dense forest, their forms barely visible in the gathering dusk. Their target was an isolated training compound, nestled among the towering pines, where 6 highly trained hunting dogs were kenneled for the night. These weren't ordinary hunting dogs. They were elite tracking animals worth a fortune on the black market, trained by a legendary special forces veteran. The cartel members had no idea they were about to steal from the wrong man, a decision that would unleash a chain of events more devastating than they could imagine. The storm intensified as thunder rolled across the valley, masking the sound of bolt cutters working through heavy chains. Inside the main house, retired Master Sergeant Connor "Ghost" Mitchell slept fitfully, haunted by memories of past operations and unaware that his worst nightmare was about to begin. The security system had been disabled with military precision, suggesting this was no ordinary theft. As the intruders moved through the compound with practiced efficiency, the dogs remained eerily silent, their advanced training preventing them from giving away the threat exactly as they'd been taught. Lightning illuminated the scene in stark flashes, revealing glimpses of the professional crew as they worked. Their movements were coordinated and deliberate, speaking to years of experience in similar operations. They believed they were simply acquiring valuable assets for their cartel's dogfighting operation south of the border. None of them realized these animals were worth far more than money to their owner, or that taking them would awaken a force that had been dormant since Mitchell's retirement from the Special Forces. The first signs that something was wrong came when Mitchell's security sensors went dark. Years of combat experience snapped him instantly awake, his hand already reaching for the weapon beside his bed. But by then, the intruders had nearly completed their mission. Through the sheets of rain, he caught only fleeting glimpses of dark figures loading his dogs into specially modified vehicles designed for just this kind of operation. The dogs, Ajax, Shadow, Havoc, Ghost, Cypher, and Echo, were more than just highly trained hunting companions. Each represented countless hours of intensive training, drawing on Mitchell's decades of Special Forces experience. They were living embodiments of everything he'd learned about tracking, stealth, and tactical operations. To the cartel, they were simply valuable merchandise. To Mitchell, they were family. As the vehicles disappeared into the stormy night, Mitchell's training kicked in. He moved through his house with practiced efficiency, gathering essential gear and accessing hidden caches of equipment he'd hoped never to need again. His movements were automatic, muscle memory from years of high-stakes operations taking over. The rain continued to pour as he began documenting the scene, his mind already formulating a plan of action. The thieves had been good, very good. But they'd left subtle signs that only someone with Mitchell's background would recognize. The precision of the breach, the professionalism of the execution, and certain distinctive tactics all pointed to a specific cartel operation, one he'd encountered before during his final mission with the Special Forces. The realization sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold rain soaking through his clothes. Inside his secure room, hidden behind reinforced walls and accessible only through a biometric lock, Mitchell activated a system he'd installed but never thought he'd use. Screens came to life, displaying data from tracking devices so sophisticated they were practically undetectable. The cartel might think they'd gotten away clean, but Mitchell had learned long ago to prepare for the worst. Each dog carried multiple, redundant trackers, some of them utilizing classified technology from his Special Forces days. The data painted a clear picture. The vehicles were heading south, following back roads and avoiding main highways. Their destination was almost certainly across the border, where the cartel operated with near impunity. Mitchell knew he had a narrow window of opportunity before his dogs disappeared into a network of hidden compounds and fortified locations. Time was critical, but rushing in without proper preparation would be suicide. As he gathered his gear, Mitchell's mind drifted to the intensive training sessions with each dog. Ajax, the alpha of the pack, had shown an almost supernatural ability to track and coordinate with the others. Shadow could move through dense forest without making a sound, a skill that had saved Mitchell's life more than once during hunting expeditions. Havoc's strength and courage were matched only by his unwavering loyalty. Ghost, named after Mitchell's own call sign, possessed an incredible ability to remain undetected until the perfect moment to strike. Cypher had demonstrated an almost human-like ability to solve complex problems, while Echo's tracking abilities bordered on the miraculous. The rain was beginning to ease as Mitchell made his final preparations. He moved with the same methodical precision that had kept him alive through countless operations in hostile territory. His gear was selected with careful consideration. Lightweight but effective, focused on stealth and mobility rather than raw firepower. He knew he would be operating alone, deep in enemy territory, against an opponent with superior numbers and resources. The first light of dawn was breaking through the clouds as Mitchell completed his loadout. His tactical vest carried only essential equipment, each item chosen for a specific purpose. The knife on his hip was the same one he'd carried through 3 tours in Special Forces. His rifle, a customized model he'd modified himself, was equipped with specialized optics and a suppressor. Everything was designed for silent, efficient operation. In his garage, Mitchell uncovered a vehicle that hadn't seen use since his return to civilian life. The modified 4-wheel drive truck was stripped down and enhanced for off-road performance, with hidden compartments containing additional equipment and supplies. As he conducted his final checks, his phone buzzed with an incoming message. The contact was one he hadn't heard from in years, someone from his old unit who now worked in law enforcement along the border. The message confirmed his worst fears. The cartel behind the theft was indeed the same organization he'd encountered during his final mission. They had evolved since then, becoming more sophisticated in their operations. The dog theft wasn't just about acquiring valuable animals for their fighting rings. It was part of a larger operation, one that suggested they knew exactly whose dogs they were stealing. Mitchell's jaw tightened as he read the details. The cartel had been expanding their operations, using trained dogs for everything from protection to drug detection to tracking rival gang members. They had been specifically targeting military and law enforcement trained animals, building their own specialized K9 unit. But stealing his dogs, that was different. That was personal, whether they knew it or not. The morning sun was burning off the last remnants of the storm as Mitchell loaded his equipment into the truck. The tracking data showed the transport vehicles had crossed into Canada, likely planning to move south through Mexico later. It was a smart route, one that would throw off most pursuit. But Mitchell wasn't most pursuers. He had tracked high-value targets across multiple continents through some of the most challenging terrain on Earth. As he prepared to depart, Mitchell took one final look at his compound. The scene of the theft was already growing cold, but his trained eye could still read the story, written in broken equipment and muddy footprints. The cartel had sent their best team for this operation, professionals who specialized in high-risk acquisitions. They had executed their mission perfectly, but they had made one critical mistake. They had taken something irreplaceable from a man who had spent his entire career hunting down people who took things that didn't belong to them. Mitchell started his truck and began the journey that would lead him back into a world he'd left behind. The comfortable life he'd built since retirement, the peaceful existence training dogs and living off the grid, that was over now. The cartel had brought the war to his doorstep, and he would respond with everything he'd learned in a lifetime of combat. His dogs were more than just animals. They were family, and he would bring them home, no matter the cost. The tracking data continued to update on his secured tablet as he drove, showing the transport vehicles making their way through the complex. Network of back roads and hidden routes that the cartel had established. Mitchell's mind was already gaming out scenarios, analyzing potential intercept points and planning for contingencies. The cartel might have numbers and resources on their side, but he had something they couldn't match: intimate knowledge of how his dogs would behave in combat situations. Each dog had been trained not just for hunting, but for tactical operations. They could disable enemies without killing, create diversions, and even conduct complex coordinated actions on command. In the right situation, they would be as dangerous to their captors as any weapon. Mitchell allowed himself a grim smile as he thought about what might happen when the cartel discovered just how special his dogs really were. The hunt was on, and this time he was the predator. Away from the stormy mountains of Montana, in a remote staging area just across the Canadian border, a group of cartel operatives worked efficiently to transfer their valuable cargo. The 6 hunting dogs were being moved from the initial transport vehicles into specially modified crates within a larger truck. The operation was running smoothly until one of the handlers approached Ajax's cage. The massive Belgian Malinois locked eyes, with the man displaying none of the fear or aggression typical of captured animals. Instead, the dog watched with an unsettling intelligence that made the handler hesitate. Ricardo El Coyote Vargas, the team's leader, noticed the handler's hesitation and stepped forward. A veteran of countless cross-border operations, Vargas had earned his reputation through a combination of ruthless efficiency and careful planning. But something about these dogs made him uneasy. They were too calm, too controlled. Even now, as his men worked to secure them for transport, not one had barked or shown signs of distress. The transfer point was well chosen, a seemingly abandoned logging facility surrounded by dense forest. Security teams maintained a careful watch on the perimeter, their weapons ready but hidden from casual observation. Everything about the operation spoke of professional planning and execution, from the carefully timed border crossing to the multiple layers of security. To any observer, it would appear to be nothing more than routine activity at a remote industrial site. Vargas studied the documents that had accompanied the mission briefing. The dog's estimated value was substantial, but the intelligence suggested they were worth far more than mere money. Their former owner, the Special Forces veteran, had reportedly used classified training techniques, combining military tactics with advanced hunting skills. The cartel's leadership believed these dogs could revolutionize their operations, providing capabilities that would put them far ahead of their rivals. One of Vargas's lieutenants approached with an update on their timeline. The storm that had provided cover for the initial theft was moving south, which would work to their advantage during the next phase of transport. But something in the lieutenant's expression caught Vargas's attention, a hint of concern that seemed out of place for such a well-executed operation. "The owner," the lieutenant said quietly, keeping his voice low to avoid being overheard. "Our sources say he's not just any special forces veteran. They say he was part of a classified unit, one that specialized in tracking high-value targets across borders. They call him Ghost, and there are stories about him that make even hardened soldiers nervous." Vargas dismissed the concern with a wave of his hand, but internally he felt a flicker of unease. He had encountered special forces operators before, had even lost men to their operations, but this was different. They hadn't just stolen valuable property, they had taken something personal from a man trained to hunt people across continents. The dogs watched silently as the team completed their preparations. Shadow, the black German shepherd, tracked every movement with predatory focus. Next to him, Havoc's muscular frame tensed subtly whenever anyone came too close to his cage. The others, Ghost, Cypher, and Echo, maintained their disciplined silence, but their alertness never wavered. Inside the main office of the logging facility, Vargas reviewed the satellite imagery of their planned route. The journey south would take them through carefully selected crossing points, using a network of safe houses and corrupt officials. The cartel had spent years building this infrastructure, making it nearly invisible to law enforcement. But as he studied the maps, Vargas couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. A sudden commotion outside drew his attention. One of the handlers had gotten too close to Echo's cage, and though the dog hadn't made a sound or aggressive move, the man had stumbled backward in panic. When questioned, he struggled to explain his reaction. "Those eyes," he said, his voice shaking. "It's like it was reading my mind, waiting for something." The incident reinforced Vargas's growing concern. These were not ordinary animals, not even by the standards of military-trained dogs. Their behavior was too controlled, too coordinated. Even now, as he watched through the office window, he could see them maintaining visual coverage of the entire area. Each dog focused on a different sector, just as they had been trained. The satellite phone on his desk chirped with an incoming message. The text was brief but concerning. Their surveillance. Teams had detected unusual movement on some of the back roads leading toward the border. Nothing definitive, but patterns that suggested someone with professional training was moving in their direction. Vargas immediately began implementing contingency plans. Additional security teams were dispatched to cover potential approach routes, and the schedule for the next transport phase was accelerated. They needed to get the dogs across the border and into Mexico before anyone could track them down. The dogs themselves seemed to sense the change in activity. Ajax, the clear leader of the pack, had shifted his position slightly, maintaining eye contact with each of his companions in turn. To anyone else, it might have appeared to be normal animal behavior, but Vargas had spent enough time around military working dogs to recognize coordination when he saw it. A light rain began to fall as the team prepared for departure. The massive transport truck had been disguised as a commercial vehicle, complete with legitimate-looking paperwork and a carefully crafted cover story. Similar trucks had made this journey hundreds of times, carrying various illicit cargo across borders without detection. The loading process was methodical and carefully planned. Each dog's crate was secured with multiple redundant locks, and cameras were positioned to monitor them throughout the journey. The cartel had learned from experience that valuable cargo required constant surveillance, especially when that cargo was intelligent and potentially dangerous. As the last of the equipment was stowed, Vargas received another update from his surveillance teams. The unusual movement they had detected earlier had stopped, but now they were picking up strange signals. Brief, encrypted bursts of data that suggested military-grade communication equipment was being used in the area. The implications were clear. Someone was already on their trail, moving with the skill and efficiency that came from years of professional experience. Vargas knew they needed to move quickly, but rushing could lead to mistakes. He had built his reputation on careful planning and perfect execution, and he wasn't about to let fear push him into an error. The transport truck's engine rumbled to life, its sound muffled by special modifications designed to make it as quiet as possible. The security teams took up their positions, some riding in escort vehicles, while others would follow different routes to avoid drawing attention to the main transport. Inside their crates, the dogs remained eerily calm. Their training had prepared them for long periods of silent observation, gathering intelligence about their surroundings and waiting for the perfect moment to act. To them, this was just another operation, and they had absolute confidence that their handler would find them. Vargas made a final check of the facility, ensuring no evidence was left behind that could be used to track their movements. As he completed his inspection, he found himself standing before Ajax's crate. The dog met his gaze with an intensity that was almost human, and for a moment, Vargas could have sworn he saw something like amusement in those watchful eyes. The convoy departed as the rain intensified, each vehicle taking a different initial route before converging at predetermined points along the journey. On paper, the plan was perfect. Multiple layers of security, carefully planned routes, and enough firepower to handle any reasonable threat. But as they pulled away from the logging facility, Vargas couldn't shake the feeling that they were now part of someone else's hunt, and they had just become the prey. The transport truck moved steadily through the darkness, its progress monitored by multiple tracking systems and surveillance teams. But unknown to Vargas and his men, each dog carried something they hadn't detected: sophisticated tracking devices that were now actively transmitting their location to a man who had spent his life perfecting the art of the hunt. The real operation was just beginning, and the coming hours would prove just how much they had underestimated both the dogs and their owner. In a dimly lit operations room hidden within a secluded mountain lodge, an elite group of retired Special Forces operators monitored a complex array of surveillance equipment. The lodge, owned by Kevin "Sparks" Rodriguez, had served as an unofficial gathering point for former team members who couldn't quite leave the life behind. Today, it had transformed into an impromptu command center as they tracked their old comrade's pursuit of his stolen dogs. Sparks, a former communications specialist who had served alongside Mitchell, studied the encrypted data streams flowing across his screens. The tracking devices implanted in the dogs were broadcasting on frequencies few civilians even knew existed, using technology that wasn't supposed to be in private hands. But Mitchell had always been prepared for the worst. and his foresight was now proving invaluable. "Ghosts moving fast," Sparks muttered, marking Mitchell's position on a digital map. He's already picked up their trail and he's paralleling their route. Around him, other retired operators monitored different aspects of the situation. Each had dropped everything to help when they'd received Mitchell's alert code, a signal they'd hoped never to see. Sarah Hawk Chen, their former reconnaissance expert, studied satellite imagery of the convoy's projected route. Her fingers danced across the keyboard as she analyzed terrain features and potential choke points. "They're good," she admitted grudgingly. "Multiple vehicles, different routes, proper spacing. These aren't amateurs we're dealing with." The team had gathered quickly once Mitchell's signal went out. They knew what those dogs meant to him, understood how he'd poured everything he'd learned from decades of special operations into their training. Each animal was a masterpiece of military capability, combined with hunting instinct, worth millions to the right buyer, or priceless in the wrong hands. James "Doc" Wilson, who had served as their team medic, approached the main display with a concerned expression. "Just got word from our contact in Border Patrol. The cartel behind this, it's the Los Fantasmas organization. The same ones from Mitchell's last mission." The news sent a ripple of tension through the room. Everyone remembered that operation and the cost it had extracted. Los Fantasmas had evolved far beyond typical cartel operations. They employed former military personnel, used cutting-edge technology, and operated with a level of sophistication that put them closer to a paramilitary organization than a criminal enterprise. Their interest in Mitchell's dogs suggested something bigger than mere profit motivation. Sparks pulled up detailed tracking data from each dog's transmitter. Ajax, the pack leader, was maintaining a perfectly calm heart rate despite the stress of transport. The other dogs showed similar readings, no signs of panic or distress. They were waiting, conserving energy, just as they'd been trained. "Look at this," Sarah pointed to a pattern in the convoy's movement. "They're using old logging roads, but their route isn't random. They're following a specific protocol, probably designed to shake any pursuit." Her analysis confirmed what they all suspected. This was a professional operation, planned and executed by people with military or intelligence backgrounds. The rain continued to fall outside the lodge as the team coordinated their support efforts. Each operator had maintained connections after leaving service, contacts in law enforcement, intelligence agencies, and private security. Now those networks were being activated, creating an invisible web of surveillance and information gathering. A priority alert flashed across one of the secondary monitors. "Multiple vehicles just pinged at Checkpoint Bravo," Doc reported, referring to one of their pre-established surveillance points. "Matching the description of our targets, but something's off about their formation." He studied the data more closely. They're running a shell game. Multiple identical vehicles, probably all retrofitted the same way. Sarah moved to a separate workstation and began correlating the vehicle data with satellite imagery. Classic misdirection. They're trying to make it impossible to know which truck actually has the dogs. "But they don't know about our tracking devices." She allowed herself a small smile. Mitchell's paranoia is finally paying off. The sophisticated tracking system had been Mitchell's own design, drawing on classified technology he'd encountered during his service. Each dog carried multiple redundant devices, some biological, others technological, making them nearly impossible to lose. The cartel might think they were running a perfect operation, but they were actually under constant surveillance. Sparks noticed a subtle change in the tracking data. Ajax's heart rate just increased slightly. Not enough to indicate stress, but he trailed off as he correlated the data with the transport route. They're approaching their first major transition point. The dogs can probably sense the change in elevation. The team had worked with Mitchell's dogs before, had seen firsthand their extraordinary capabilities. These weren't simply well-trained animals. They were the product of years of specialized conditioning, combining natural instincts with advanced tactical training. Each dog had been selected for specific traits and then developed into something unprecedented. A new alert caught their attention. Movement on the back roads parallel to the convoy's route. "That's Ghost," Sarah confirmed, studying the pattern. "He's maintaining pursuit distance, using terrain masking to stay undetected. Classic Mitchell." The team watched as their former comrade executed a textbook parallel pursuit, invisible to the convoy, but perfectly positioned to intercept if needed. Doc pulled up additional satellite imagery, focusing on the areas ahead of the convoy. They're going to have to stop soon. Even with multiple drivers, they'll need to rest and refuel. That's when they'll be most vulnerable. He began marking potential locations where the convoy might pause, calculating distances and timing. The tactical display updated with new information from their border contacts. The cartel was moving additional forces into the area, establishing coverage along potential intercept routes. They were clearly expecting trouble, but their preparations revealed something crucial. They didn't understand who they were dealing with. "They're setting up as if they're expecting a frontal assault," Sarah observed. "Multiple defensive positions, overlapping fields of fire. But that's not how Mitchell operates. He never hits where they expect." The team had seen Mitchell's work firsthand, had watched him dismantle much larger organizations by striking at precisely the right point with perfect timing. Sparks noticed something in the dogs' biometric data. All 6 animals had simultaneously shown a slight elevation in heart rate, followed by a return to baseline. To anyone else, it would have appeared random, but he recognized the pattern. They're communicating with each other. Mitchell trained them to coordinate even when separated. The implications were significant. The dogs weren't just waiting to be rescued. They were actively gathering intelligence about their surroundings, maintaining unit cohesion, and preparing to act when the moment came. The cartel had stolen more than just valuable animals. They had acquired a highly trained tactical unit that was still operating according to its programming. A message came through on their secure channel. Mitchell requesting updated satellite imagery of the area ahead of the convoy. The team quickly compiled the data, marking potential ambush points and areas of tactical advantage. They knew Mitchell wouldn't need much, just enough information to formulate his plan and set it in motion. Outside, the mountain storm continued to rage, providing perfect cover for covert operations. Inside the lodge, the team maintained their vigilant watch, coordinating intelligence and supporting their comrades' mission. They had all seen Mitchell in action before, knew what he was capable of when properly motivated. The cartel had made a fatal error in targeting his dogs, and the consequences of that mistake were about to become violently apparent. The next few hours would be critical. The convoy would have to stop eventually, and when it did, Mitchell would make his move. The team settled in for a long night of surveillance and support, each operator focused on their specific tasks, all working together to ensure their friend had everything he needed to bring his family home. The convoy's first scheduled stop came shortly before midnight at an isolated truck stop near the Canadian border. The facility appeared abandoned at first glance, its weathered exterior and dim lighting carefully crafted to avoid attention. But hidden cameras covered every approach, and armed security personnel maintained a vigilant watch from concealed positions throughout the property. Inside the main transport truck, Ajax lifted his head slightly as the vehicle slowed. The Belgian, Malinois' acute senses had already detected subtle changes in their surroundings. The shift in air pressure as they descended from higher elevation, the changing sounds of tires on different road surfaces, and most importantly, the faint but distinct scent of their handler on the wind. Vargas supervised the stop personally, positioning his men with careful attention to security protocols. The dogs would remain in the transport vehicle, monitored by cameras and armed guards. Refueling and driver changes would be completed quickly, with minimal exposure to outside observation. Everything was proceeding according to plan, yet he couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. Half a mile away, concealed in the tree line overlooking the truck stop, Mitchell observed the operation. Through his thermal scope, the cartel's security was professional and thorough, but he'd already identified several exploitable weaknesses in their perimeter. More importantly, he could read his dog's body language even at this distance. They were alert and waiting, exactly as they'd been trained. The storm that had followed them south was intensifying, sheets of rain reducing visibility and masking any sounds of movement through the surrounding forest. Mitchell had trained extensively in these conditions, had learned to use adverse weather to his advantage. The security teams would be focused on maintaining their observation sectors, their attention degraded by rain and fatigue. Through his encrypted radio, Mitchell received updates from Spark's team at the lodge. The satellite data confirmed no additional cartel forces in the immediate area. They had spread their security assets along the projected route, rather than concentrating them at the stopover points. It was a logical strategy against normal pursuit, but Mitchell had no intention of playing by their rules. The first phase of his plan was already in motion. He had positioned specialized equipment at key points around the perimeter, devices that would transmit specific frequencies only his. Dogs could hear. Years of training had conditioned them to respond to these signals in very particular ways, preparing them to act as a coordinated unit when the moment came. Inside the transport truck, the dogs remained perfectly still, but their heightened awareness was evident in subtle muscle tensions and focused gazes. Shadow, the black German shepherd, had oriented himself toward the rear doors, while Havoc maintained watch over the forward section. The others, Ghost, Cypher, and Echo, had assumed equally strategic positions within their crates. Vargas approached the transport truck to check the surveillance feeds. The dog's unusual behavior continued to bother him. They were too disciplined, too coordinated in their actions. Military working dogs were typically aggressive when confined, yet these animals maintained an almost predatory calm. As he studied the monitors, he failed to notice Ajax's eyes, tracking his every movement with calculated interest. The refueling operation was nearly complete when the first anomaly appeared on the perimeter sensors, a brief signal that could have been wildlife movement in the surrounding forest. Standard procedure called for sending a team to investigate, but Vargas hesitated. Splitting his forces now in these conditions felt like an invitation to disaster. Mitchell watched through his scope as the cartel forces reacted to his first diversion. Their response was professional but predictable, revealing gaps in their security coverage that would become exploitable under the right circumstances. He had spent years teaching his dogs to capitalize on exactly these kinds of opportunities. The rain intensified further, reducing visibility to mere meters and forcing the security teams to cluster closer to the transport truck. The weather was deteriorating exactly as forecast, creating conditions that heavily favored an experienced solo operator over larger coordinated forces. Mitchell began moving to his pre-selected position for the next phase of his operation. Inside their crates, the dogs detected the changing situation through multiple sensory inputs, shifting air currents, altered sound patterns, and most importantly, the specific frequency emissions that signaled their handler's presence. Their conditioning was so thorough that they maintained their disciplined silence even as they prepared for action. Vargas received another update from his perimeter teams, more anomalous signals now appearing at multiple points around the facility. The pattern suggested coordinated movement by multiple individuals, but the thermal sensors showed no clear targets. The security teams were growing visibly uneasy, their training warring with rising uncertainty. The facility's floodlights created halos in the heavy rain, their glare actually reducing effective visibility by casting deep shadows throughout the property. Mitchell had positioned himself to exploit these shadows, using them to move gradually closer to the transport truck. His approach was methodical, each movement calculated to appear natural if glimpsed through the storm. A sudden power fluctuation caused the facility's lights to flicker momentarily. In that brief instant of darkness, multiple things happened simultaneously. The dog's tracking devices emitted a synchronized pulse that registered on Spark's monitors. Back at the lodge, Mitchell crossed another threshold in his approach vector, and most importantly, Ajax began a barely audible vocalization, a specific tone that the other dogs immediately recognized. The security team's communication channels came alive with chatter as more anomalous signals appeared on their sensors. The pattern now suggested they were being surrounded by a larger force, though no direct visual contact had been made. Vargas began implementing their emergency protocols, preparing for immediate departure. Mitchell's next moves were precisely timed to exploit the growing confusion. Using remote triggers, he activated additional frequency emitters at carefully chosen points around the facility. To the dogs, these signals conveyed specific tactical instructions, patterns they had rehearsed countless times during training exercises back at the compound. The Cartel's security forces were now facing a classical tactical dilemma, responding to multiple potential threats without being able to confirm the size or location of the opposing force. Their training emphasized maintaining security around their primary objective, the transport truck, but the increasing number of perimeter alerts demanded a response. Inside the truck, the dogs had shifted positions slightly, each one orienting toward their predetermined sectors of responsibility. Their movements were so subtle that even the surveillance cameras didn't register anything unusual, but they were now perfectly positioned to act in concert when the signal came. Vargas ordered the transport drivers to prepare for immediate departure, while keeping most of his security forces deployed around the truck. Years of experience had taught him the value of protecting his primary objective, but he couldn't ignore the possibility that they were about to be hit by a larger force. The storm reached its peak intensity, rain drumming against the facilities, metal roofs, and creating a constant background roar that made audio communication difficult. Security teams were forced to rely more heavily on hand signals and radio traffic, further degrading their tactical coordination. Mitchell had closed to within his final attack position, using the storm's coverage to mask his approach. Through his thermal scope, he could see the heat signatures of the security teams clustered around the transport truck. More importantly, he could see his dogs' signatures, their positions telling him they were ready to execute their trained responses. Facility's power fluctuated again, more severely this time. In the instant of darkness, Mitchell keyed his transmitter, sending a specific frequency pattern that only his dogs would recognize. It was the signal they had been waiting for, the command to initiate the sequence they had practiced countless times during their training. Inside the transport truck, Ajax responded first, beginning a complex series of movements that appeared to be simple restlessness to the surveillance cameras. The other dogs followed his lead, each one's actions precisely coordinated to create the effect they had been trained to achieve. The hunt was about to enter its final phase, and the cartel was about to learn exactly what these dogs were capable of. Within the darkened transport truck, 6 pairs of highly trained eyes watched with predatory focus as their moment approached. Ajax, the pack leader, initiated a series of subtle movements that appeared random to the surveillance cameras, but carried clear meaning to his companions. The sophisticated locks on their crates, designed to be impenetrable, had a fatal flaw. They hadn't been designed to withstand the combined intelligence and training of Mitchell's dogs. Shadow began working methodically at his crate's mechanism, using techniques practiced countless times during their training exercises. Each dog had been taught to manipulate complex devices, their natural intelligence enhanced by years of specialized conditioning. The cartel's security teams, focused on external threats, remained unaware of the coordinated activity taking place inside the truck. Outside, the storm reached a deafening crescendo, rain hammering against metal surfaces and creating a natural smokescreen of noise and limited visibility. Mitchell had moved to his final position, every piece of his plan now perfectly aligned. The frequency emitters he'd placed continued to create patterns of movement on the cartel's sensors, drawing their attention to phantom threats around the perimeter. Vargas paced near the truck's cab, his instinct screaming that something was wrong, despite the apparent security of their position. The dogs had gone completely still, which should have been reassuring, but instead heightened his sense of impending danger. Years of experience had taught him to trust his intuition, and right now, every fiber of his being warned of imminent threat. In the command post back at the lodge, Sparks monitored the dogs' biometric data with growing excitement. Their synchronized, vital signs told a clear story to those who knew how to read them. They were executing a coordinated action, just as they'd been trained. The cartel's surveillance systems, sophisticated as they were, couldn't detect the subtle indicators that Mitchell's team could see. The first lock disengaged silently, the mechanism yielding to Shadow's practiced manipulation. The black German, Shepard, remained motionless, waiting for the next signal from Ajax. Each dog understood their role in the sequence, knew exactly when and how to act. Their conditioning was so thorough that even in this highly stressful situation, they maintained perfect discipline. Mitchell keyed his radio once, sending a coded burst that his support team at the lodge immediately recognized. It was the signal they'd been waiting for. Confirmation that he was in position and ready to execute the final phase of his plan. Sarah immediately began adjusting satellite coverage, ensuring they would have clear observation of the coming action. Inside the truck, Havoc had begun working on his own crate's lock, his powerful muscles tensed but controlled. The dog's extraordinary strength, carefully honed through specialized training, would be crucial in the next phase of their escape. Beside him, Ghost maintained watchful silence, his pale eyes fixed on the camera monitoring their compartment. The facility's lights flickered again, more violently this time, as Mitchell's pre-planted devices began affecting the power grid. The security teams shifted nervously, their training warring with growing uncertainty. In the command vehicle, Vargas watched his monitors with increasing concern as systems began showing signs of electromagnetic interference. Cypher and Echo, still secured in their crates, had oriented themselves precisely according to their training. Their positioning seemed casual to observers, but would allow for maximum efficiency when the moment came. Years of tactical exercises had taught them exactly how to create the chaos their handler needed. A sudden gust of wind drove the rain sideways, momentarily reducing visibility to near zero. In that instant, Mitchell triggered his next sequence of diversions. Multiple frequency emitters activated simultaneously, creating a pattern of movement that suggested a coordinated assault was beginning. The cartel's security teams responded, exactly as their training dictated, moving to defensive positions around the transport truck. Ajax's ears twitched slightly as he detected the specific tones hidden within the storm's cacophony. The signals conveyed precise instructions, timing sequences that the dogs had memorized through countless repetitions. Their handler was counting on their ability to execute these commands perfectly, and they were ready. Vargas ordered an immediate departure, his instincts now screaming that they had stayed too long. As his men moved to implement the order, none of them noticed the subtle changes taking place inside the transport compartment. The dogs' synchronized movements were lost in the general commotion of preparation for emergency departure. The second set of locks disengaged, again with perfect silence. The dogs remained absolutely still, their discipline holding even as their opportunity for action approached. Their training had prepared them for extended periods of controlled waiting, followed by explosive bursts of coordinated activity. Mitchell watched through his thermal scope as the cartel forces adjusted their positions. Their security formation was professional but predictable, focusing on defending against external threats while remaining unaware of the danger building inside their own transport. He allowed himself a grim smile, knowing what was about to unfold. The storm's intensity had forced the security teams to cluster closer to the transport truck, reducing their effective observation range. The weather conditions that hampered their operations were exactly what Mitchell had been waiting for. Nature itself seemed to be cooperating with his plan. Inside the truck, the final phase of preparation was nearly complete. Each dog had assumed their precise position, muscles coiled and ready, but maintaining absolute stillness. Their breathing patterns remained perfectly controlled, giving no indication of their readiness for action. Vargas approached the truck one last time, intending to verify the cargo's security before departure. As he reached for the rear compartment's external monitor, Ajax's eyes tracked his movement with predatory focus. The dog's intense gaze should have warned him, but the cartel leader was too focused on his external threats to notice. The facility's power grid fluctuated one final time, more severely than before. In that moment of darkness and confusion, Mitchell transmitted the execution signal, a specific frequency pattern that carried command authority to his trained unit. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Ajax moved first, his power and precision, releasing the remaining restraints in one explosive burst. Shadow and Havoc followed instantly, their coordinated movements creating a cascade of action that transformed the transport compartment into a scene of controlled chaos. The surveillance cameras caught only blurred images of motion before failing completely. The security team's first warning came as a series of sharp impacts against the truck's interior, followed by the sound of multiple restraint systems failing simultaneously. Before anyone could react, the transport's rear doors burst outward with devastating force, catching the nearest guards completely by surprise. 6 highly trained military dogs exploded from the confined space, each moving with lethal precision toward pre-designated targets. Their attack pattern had been rehearsed countless times, designed to create maximum disruption while minimizing the risk of injury to themselves or innocent bystanders. Ajax led the assault, targeting key security personnel with stunning accuracy. His movements were a perfect blend of military training and natural predatory instinct, neutralizing threats without causing fatal injuries. Shadow moved like his namesake through the chaos, appearing seemingly from nowhere to disable armed opponents before vanishing again into the storm. The Cartel security teams, trained to deal with human adversaries, found themselves completely unprepared for this kind of assault. The dogs moved with coordinated precision that spoke of advanced tactical training, their attacks synchronized to create overwhelming confusion while preventing effective resistance. Havoc's raw power came into play as he engaged multiple opponents simultaneously, his massive frame moving with surprising speed through the combat zone. Ghost seemed to materialize from the rain itself, striking with surgical precision before disappearing again. Cypher and Echo worked in perfect tandem, herding their opponents into vulnerable positions while avoiding return fire. Mitchell chose this moment to join the action, his approach completely masked by the chaos his dogs had created. His first shots disabled the facility's remaining surveillance systems, plunging the area into darkness, broken only by muzzle flashes and the storm's lightning. His movements through the combat zone were precisely coordinated with his dog's actions. Years of training, allowing them to operate as a single unit. The Cartel forces, despite their professional training and superior numbers, found themselves methodically dismantled by an opposition they couldn't effectively engage. The dogs' attack had completely disrupted their security protocols, forcing them to abandon practiced responses in favor of desperate improvisation. The operation that had seemed so perfectly planned and executed was now unraveling in a storm of teeth, tactical precision, and coordinated violence. The hunter had become the hunted, and the prey had revealed itself to be something far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. The night was far from over, and the true cost of stealing from a Special Forces veteran was about to become brutally clear. The storm's intensity matched the chaos unfolding at the truck stop as Mitchell's dogs executed their coordinated assault. Ajax moved like a guided missile through the gun smoke and rain, his powerful frame launching into a Cartel gunman who had been trying to draw a bead on Shadow. The Belgian Malinois' training ensured the takedown was precise, disabling without killing, neutralizing the threat while maintaining tactical discipline. Shadow materialized from the darkness behind 2 more guards, his silent approach a testament to years of specialized training. Before they could react, the German Shepherd had disarmed one and forced the other to the ground, his movements displaying a level of control that seemed almost supernatural in its precision. The rain-slicked pavement became a battlefield where human opponents found themselves helplessly outmaneuvered by canine tactical expertise. Mitchell advanced through the combat zone with methodical efficiency, his movements perfectly synchronized with his dog's actions. Each step, each shot was calculated to support their coordinated assault while maintaining maximum tactical advantage. The Cartel's security teams, already struggling to counter the dog's attack, now found themselves caught in a perfectly executed pincer movement. Havoc demonstrated why he'd earned his name, his massive frame crashing through a makeshift barricade where 3 Cartel members had taken cover. The dog's raw power, combined with advanced tactical training, created a force that seemed unstoppable. Metal screeched and wood splintered as the barrier collapsed, leaving the guards exposed to the coordinated attacks of Ghost and Cypher. Inti, the command post at the lodge. Sparks and his team watched the operation unfold through satellite feeds and the dog's tracking data. The biometric readings told a story of perfectly controlled aggression. Heart rates elevated but stable, movements coordinated with military precision. This wasn't just an attack, it was a demonstration of years of specialized training being put into action. Vargas attempted to rally his forces, shouting orders that were lost in the storm's fury and the chaos of combat. His professional demeanor had cracked, replaced by growing panic as he watched his carefully planned operation dissolve into disaster. The security teams that had seemed so formidable were being systematically dismantled by opponents they couldn't effectively engage. Echo moved through the battlefield like a ghost, appearing momentarily to disable key targets before vanishing back into the rain and darkness. The dog's ability to identify and neutralize priority threats spoke to countless hours of training in target selection and tactical engagement. Each movement was precise, each attack calculated for maximum effect with minimum force. Mitchell's voice cut through the chaos, issuing commands that the dogs responded to instantly. Their attacks shifted and flowed like water, adapting to changing tactical situations with fluid grace. Years of training had created a unit that could operate seamlessly under any conditions, each member understanding their role in the larger strategy. The transport truck's engine roared to life as one of the drivers attempted to escape with their valuable cargo, not realizing the compartment was now empty. Ajax and Shadow moved in perfect tandem, cutting off the vehicle's exit route while Havoc positioned himself for a direct engagement. The driver's only warning was a flash of movement before 3 highly trained military dogs converged on his position. Inside the lodge's command center, Sarah tracked multiple heat signatures retreating from the combat zone. The Cartel's forces were breaking, their coordinated defense crumbling in the face of an assault they hadn't been prepared to counter. The satellite feed showed the precise pattern of Mitchell's attack, a tactical masterpiece being executed in real time. Cypher's distinctive bark cut through the night, a signal that another group of guards was attempting to flank their position. The dog's intelligence-gathering abilities had been honed through countless exercises, creating a tactical asset that could process and communicate battlefield information instantly. Mitchell adjusted his approach accordingly, moving to intercept the threat while Ghost and Echo maintained pressure on the main force. The rain continued to pour, but now it worked against the cartel's forces, masking the approach of their attackers, while limiting their own visibility. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating scenes of careful violence. Trained dogs moving with military precision, disabling opponents with calculated force while avoiding lethal engagement. Vargas found himself cornered near the facility's main building, his remaining security details scattered or neutralized. The professional calm that had marked his earlier operations was gone, replaced by the raw fear of a man who realized too late what kind of force he had provoked. As he raised his weapon, a low growl from behind made him freeze. Ajax emerged from the shadows, his presence radiating controlled aggression. The dog's training was evident in every movement, every muscle, perfectly tensed for action but waiting for the command. Behind him, Mitchell appeared like a specter from the storm, his rifle trained steadily on the cartel leader. The facility's remaining lights cast harsh shadows across the scene as Vargas slowly lowered his weapon. Around them, the sounds of combat were fading, replaced by the steady drumming of rain and occasional thunder. The operation that had seemed so perfectly planned now lay in ruins, defeated by a force that had turned the hunters into the hunted. Mitchell's voice carried clearly, despite the storm as he addressed his former adversary. His words were measured, carrying the weight of experience and absolute certainty. The message was simple. This was over, and any further resistance would be met with overwhelming force. The dogs maintained their positions, their discipline, unwavering even in victory. From the tree line emerged additional figures. Sparks and his team had moved in to secure the area once the main fighting subsided. Their arrival completed the tactical encirclement, ensuring that none of the cartel's forces could escape to warn their superiors. The precision of the operation spoke to years of professional experience, every angle covered, every contingency planned for. The storm began to ease as the cleanup operation commenced. Law enforcement units, coordinated through Mitchell's contacts, would arrive soon to take custody of the prisoners and gather evidence. The dogs maintained their vigilant watch, their training ensuring that security remained tight until the situation was fully contained. Ajax approached his handler, his bearing still professional, but showing the first signs of relief at being reunited. The bond between man and dog was evident in their interaction, not just owner and pet, but brothers in arms who had complete trust in each other's capabilities. The other dogs maintained their positions, understanding that the operation wasn't truly over until their handler gave the all-clear. Mitchell surveyed the aftermath of the battle, noting with satisfaction that his dogs had followed their training perfectly. The damage was significant but controlled, with no fatalities despite the intensity of the combat. Each dog had demonstrated exactly the level of force necessary to neutralize threats without crossing the line into lethal engagement. The first law enforcement vehicles began arriving, their lights cutting through the diminishing rain. Mitchell's team coordinated with the authorities, ensuring a smooth transition of custody while maintaining tactical control of the scene. The dogs remained alert, their training keeping them focused until they received explicit orders to stand down. In the growing light of dawn, the full scope of the operation became clear. The cartel's transport network had been exposed, their security protocols proven inadequate against a superior force. More importantly, they had learned a costly lesson about the consequences of underestimating both the handler and his trained companions. The morning sun broke through the clouds as Mitchell gathered his dogs, checking each one for injuries before preparing to depart. The bond between them had been forged through years of training and strengthened in combat, creating a unit that could operate seamlessly in any conditions. They had proven once again that their capabilities went far beyond ordinary military working dogs. As the scene was secured and evidence collected, the true impact of the night's events began to emerge. The cartel had lost more than just a valuable shipment. They had exposed vulnerabilities in their operations that would have far-reaching consequences. The legend of the ghost and his dogs would grow, serving as a warning to others who might consider similar operations in the future. In a darkened office deep within Los Fantasmas cartel territory, Javier Ramirez, the organization's head of special operations, reviewed the devastating reports from the failed transport mission. The security footage, what little had survived, painted a picture that seemed almost impossible. 6 highly trained military dogs coordinating with their handler to completely dismantle a professional security operation. Security footage from the truck stop showed Ajax, the pack leader, executing maneuvers that should have been impossible for any dog. The Belgian Malinois had demonstrated an almost human-like understanding of tactical situations, coordinating the other dog's movements while maintaining perfect operational discipline. Elena pulled up more data on her tablet, financial records showing the widespread impact of the operation's failure. Multiple cartel investment projects were now at risk, their funding streams compromised by the ongoing investigations. The organization's sophisticated money laundering networks were showing signs of stress. "We have to respond," she insisted, though her tone suggested she knew the complications involved. "The other cartels are watching. If we show weakness now..." She didn't need to finish the thought. In their world, any sign of vulnerability would be exploited immediately and ruthlessly by their competitors. Ramirez stood and walked to the tactical display, studying the pattern of law enforcement activities. The Americans weren't just reacting to an opportunity, they were executing a prepared plan, as if they had been waiting for exactly this kind of opening. The realization sent a chill down his spine. New intelligence reports continued to arrive, each one adding to the picture of systematic dismantling of their operations. Mitchell and his dogs had provided the spark, but the resulting firestorm was far larger than anyone had anticipated. The entire northern corridor of their territory was now compromised. The cartel's emergency protocols, designed to contain exactly this kind of catastrophic breach, were proving inadequate. Their conventional security measures had been designed to counter traditional law enforcement and military operations. Nothing in their planning had prepared them for an opponent who could think and operate on this level. Elena's tablet displayed another troubling update. Surveillance images showing increased activity around Mitchell's Montana compound. More former Special Forces operators had been identified in the area, suggesting this was only the beginning of a larger operation against the cartel's interests. The psychological impact on their personnel was becoming evident in field reports. The surviving members of the transport security team had spread stories about the dog's capabilities, creating an almost mythical aura around Mitchell and his unit. Fear was spreading through the ranks, undermining operational confidence. Ramirez studied the latest satellite imagery, noting patterns that suggested coordinated movement along the border. The Americans were establishing new surveillance positions, tightening their control over key crossing points. The cartel's freedom of movement, once nearly unlimited, was being systematically restricted. A message from the cartel's leadership demanded immediate action to contain the situation. But as Ramirez reviewed their remaining options, he realized they were operating at a severe disadvantage. Their opponent had demonstrated capabilities they couldn't effectively counter, and any direct response would likely make their situation worse. Elena assembled a preliminary damage assessment, but the numbers were already staggering. Beyond the immediate tactical losses, the strategic impact was spreading through every level of their operation. Years of careful planning and relationship building had been undone in a matter of days. The rain continued to fall outside Ramirez's office as he contemplated their next move. The organization that had seemed invincible was now facing an existential threat, all because they had failed to understand the true nature of their target. The Ghost and his dogs had done more than just defeat their security forces. They had exposed vulnerabilities that threatened the cartel's entire power structure. Back at Mitchell's Montana compound, the atmosphere was charged with quiet intensity as his team reviewed the intelligence gathered during the rescue operation. The main training barn had been converted into a temporary command center, its usual equipment sharing space with advanced surveillance gear and tactical displays. Ajax lay near Mitchell's feet, alert despite the exhaustion of recent events, while the other dogs maintained their practiced positions around the room. Sarah worked methodically through the data recovered from the cartel's transport vehicles, her expertise in intelligence analysis revealing patterns that others might have missed. The cartel's operations were far more sophisticated than they had initially believed, suggesting connections that reached into unexpected places. Documents, hard drives, and encrypted communications painted a picture of an organization with tentacles, extending deep into legitimate businesses and government institutions. "Look at this," she called, highlighting a series of transactions on the main display. They weren't just using the dog theft as a cover. It was part of a larger operation. The financial trails showed massive movements of capital, coinciding with the attempted theft, suggesting the cartel had been using the operation to mask other activities. Mitchell studied the tactical readouts while absently checking Ajax's ears for any injuries they might have missed earlier. The dog leaned into his touch, their bond evident in every interaction, but maintained his vigilant watch over the room. Years of training had created a partnership that went far beyond handler and animal. They were brothers in arms, each completely trusting in the other's capabilities. Sparks had established a secure communications network that linked their compound with law enforcement agencies along the border. The intelligence they had gathered was already bearing fruit, with multiple operations being launched against cartel infrastructure. The organization that had seemed untouchable was now finding its carefully constructed networks exposed and vulnerable. Doc moved between the dogs, conducting thorough medical checks despite their obvious eagerness to return to work. His experienced hands found no serious injuries, testament to their excellent training and the precision with which they had executed their attacks. Each dog submitted to the examination with professional patience, understanding this was part of their post-operation protocols. The evidence they had recovered revealed that Los Fantasmas had been studying Mitchell's operation for months before attempting the theft. Surveillance photos showed cartel observers tracking the dog's training routines, documenting their capabilities, but fundamentally misunderstanding what they were seeing. They had recognized the dogs' value, but had failed to grasp the true nature of their training. Shadow lifted his head suddenly, catching a scent that the humans hadn't yet noticed. Moments later, the compound's perimeter sensors registered movement at the main gate. A government vehicle was approaching, carrying senior law enforcement officials eager to debrief the team and coordinate the next phases of their operation against the cartel. Mitchell watched through the barn's reinforced windows as the vehicle was cleared through security. The dogs maintained their disciplined positions but adjusted slightly, creating optimal coverage of the room's entry points. Even here, in the safety of their home compound, their tactical training never wavered. The visitors included representatives from multiple agencies, their presence indicating the serious attention this operation had attracted. The cartel's failed attempt to steal Mitchell's dogs had opened opportunities that law enforcement had been waiting years to exploit. Now they had the intelligence and the momentum to strike decisive blows against the organization's infrastructure. Sarah's analysis had revealed another layer to the cartel's plan. They weren't just after the dog's monetary value, she explained, highlighting key documents. They were trying to replicate your training program, create their own version of what you've built here. The implications were chilling. The cartel had been working to establish their own advanced K9 unit, one that could have dramatically expanded their operational capabilities. The law enforcement officials settled into the briefing area, their expressions showing both respect for what Mitchell's team had accomplished and eagerness to exploit the opportunities it had created. Maps and tactical displays showed the expanding impact of their operation, with red markers indicating compromised cartel positions across several states. Havoc and Cypher worked the room's perimeter, their movements synchronized and purposeful. To the visitors, it might have appeared as simple patrol behavior, but Mitchell recognized the complex tactical patterns they were executing. The dogs were maintaining overlapping fields of observation while establishing multiple response options to potential threats. The intelligence briefing revealed the full scope of what they had accomplished. Beyond just recovering the dogs, they had compromised major cartel smuggling routes, exposed corruption networks, and created openings for law enforcement to target the organization's leadership. The ripple effects were spreading far beyond the initial operation. Ghost, true to his name, moved silently through the shadows of the barn, his pale coat barely visible in the dim light. The dog's extraordinary stealth capabilities had proven crucial during the rescue operation, allowing him to neutralize key threats without alerting their targets. Now he maintained that same level of tactical awareness, even in familiar surroundings. The debriefing continued as team members shared their observations and insights. Each piece of intelligence they had gathered was being analyzed and integrated into larger operational plans. The cartel had inadvertently provided them with a wealth of information about their methods, personnel, and infrastructure. Echo's distinctive bark pattern suddenly caught Mitchell's attention. A specific signal indicating approaching aircraft. Moments later, the compound sensors confirmed multiple helicopters inbound, carrying additional federal personnel and equipment. The operation was expanding rapidly as more agencies moved to exploit the breakthrough they had achieved. The dogs, Performance during the rescue had exceeded even Mitchell's high expectations. They had executed complex tactical maneuvers under extreme conditions, maintained perfect fire discipline, and adapted to rapidly changing battlefield situations. The cartel's security forces, despite their professional training, had been completely unprepared for the level of sophistication they encountered. Sarah's continued analysis of the recovered data revealed another troubling aspect of the cartel's operation. They had been developing a comprehensive database of military and law enforcement K-9 programs, suggesting a long-term strategy to target and acquire advanced training capabilities. Mitchell's dogs had just been the first step in a much larger plan. The barn's tactical displays updated continuously as new intelligence flowed in from operations along the border. The cartel's carefully constructed networks were being systematically dismantled, their leadership structure thrown into chaos. What had begun as a mission to recover stolen dogs had evolved into a major strike against one of the most sophisticated criminal organizations in North America. Ajax moved to Mitchell's side as the briefing reached its conclusion, the dog's posture reflecting both alertness and the deep bond they shared. Together, they had faced countless challenges and emerged stronger each time. The cartel's attempt to separate them had only demonstrated the unbreakable connection between handler and dog, a partnership forged through years of training and tempered. In combat, the compound hummed with activity as plans were made for the next phase of operations. Mitchell's team would play a crucial role, their unique capabilities and intimate knowledge of the cartel's methods making them invaluable assets. The dogs would once again be at the forefront, their advanced training and tactical sophistication providing advantages that conventional forces couldn't match. The aftermath of the rescue operation brought unexpected challenges as law enforcement agencies moved to exploit the intelligence windfall. Mitchell's compound had transformed into a hub of activity, with analysts and tactical teams working around the clock to process the information they had gathered. The dogs maintained their disciplined routines, but there was a new edge to their awareness. They understood that their fight with the cartel was far from over. Ajax positioned himself near the main tactical display, his attention focused on the movements of personnel through the command center. The Belgian Malinois had adapted seamlessly to the increased activity, maintaining his role as pack leader while integrating the new elements into his security assessments. His behavior reflected years of training in complex, fluid situations. Sarah's analysis had uncovered disturbing patterns in the cartel's operations. "They're already adapting," she reported, highlighting changes in their communication patterns. Los Fantasmas is shifting resources, changing protocols. They're trying to salvage what they can of their network. The tactical displays showed the organization's desperate attempts to shore up their crumbling infrastructure. Mitchell studied the latest intelligence reports while Shadow kept watch nearby. The documents revealed that the cartel's interest in his dogs went beyond their immediate tactical value. Los Fantasmas had been developing a sophisticated breeding program, aiming to create their own force of specially trained animals. The implications were troubling. They had been planning a long-term investment in advanced K-9 capabilities. The compound's perimeter sensors registered another group of federal vehicles approaching. Cypher and Echo moved to their observation positions, their coordinated movements demonstrating the advanced tactical awareness that had made them so effective during the rescue. Even in the security of their home base, the dogs maintained perfect operational discipline. Inside the main briefing room, Havoc patrolled with measured steps, his powerful frame conveying both strength and controlled precision. The dog's presence had a noticeable effect on visiting officials, who found themselves unconsciously giving him a wide berth. His reputation from the truck stop engagement had spread quickly through law enforcement circles. Sparks monitored the encrypted communications channels, tracking the cartel's desperate attempts to maintain control of their operations. They're burning assets, he noted, marking compromised locations on the tactical map. Abandoning safe houses, cutting ties with compromised contacts. The whole network is unraveling. The organization's carefully constructed infrastructure was collapsing faster than they could adapt. The intelligence they had gathered painted a picture of systematic corruption reaching into unexpected places. Ghost moved silently through the command center as officials discussed the implications of what they had uncovered. The dog's stealth capabilities seemed particularly appropriate given the sensitive nature of the information being processed. Mitchell's team had established a temporary kennel facility within the command center, allowing the dogs to maintain their regular rest and training schedules while remaining ready for immediate deployment. The setup reflected their understanding that this operation would require sustained effort over an extended period. Doc continued his regular health checks on the dogs, paying particular attention to any lingering effects from the rescue operation. His experienced hands found only minor issues. The animals' superior training and conditioning had allowed them to emerge from intense combat virtually unscathed. Their performance had exceeded even the highest expectations. The tactical displays showed multiple operations being launched along the border, each one targeting vulnerabilities exposed by the intelligence they had gathered. The cartel's attempts to adapt were hampered by the speed and precision of the law enforcement response. Their usual tactics of corruption and intimidation proved ineffective against the coordinated assault on their infrastructure. Sarah's analysis team had uncovered another layer of the cartel's plan. The documents revealed extensive research into military and police K-9 programs worldwide. Los Fantasmas had been systematically gathering information on advanced training techniques, building a database that would have allowed them to develop their own elite dog units. Ajax's attention shifted suddenly toward the compound's main entrance, followed moments later by the arrival of senior military officials. The dog's ability to detect and assess potential threats before they became visible continued to impress even those familiar with advanced K-9 capabilities. His tactical awareness seemed almost supernatural at times. The briefing room filled with representatives from various agencies as Mitchell prepared to share the latest intelligence. The dogs maintained their positions according to their training, each one covering specific sectors while remaining ready to respond to any threat. Their presence added a tangible element of security to the proceedings. Havoc's distinctive low growl silenced a heated discussion about jurisdiction, reminding everyone present that some things transcended typical bureaucratic boundaries. Dog's intervention was perfectly timed, demonstrating once again the incredible situational awareness that made these animals so valuable in tactical situations. The evidence they had recovered revealed the full scope of Los Fantasmas' ambitions. The cartel had been positioning themselves to become a major force in specialized military contracting, using their advanced K-9 units as a foundation for expansion into legitimate security operations. Mitchell's dogs had represented a crucial first step in that plan. Shadow moved with liquid grace through the command center, his black coat making him nearly invisible in the dimly lit corners. The dog's extraordinary stealth capabilities had proven crucial during the rescue operation, and now they served equally well in maintaining security during sensitive briefings. The compound's defensive positions had been reinforced, with additional security measures integrated into the existing infrastructure. The dogs adapted seamlessly to the changes, incorporating new elements into their patrol patterns while maintaining their core tactical protocols. Their training allowed them to adjust to evolving situations without losing operational effectiveness. Echo's specialized communication abilities proved invaluable as they coordinated with multiple agencies. The dog's distinct warning signals could cut through the noise of operations, providing clear tactical alerts that everyone quickly learned to recognize and respect. His role as an early warning system enhanced the overall security of the compound. Mitchell reviewed the latest satellite imagery with his team, tracking the cartel's desperate attempts to salvage their operations. The dogs maintained their vigilant watch as analysts identified patterns in the organization's movements. Each piece of intelligence they processed brought them closer to completely dismantling Los Fantasma's infrastructure. The compound's training areas remained active despite the ongoing operations, with the dogs maintaining their regular exercise and skill maintenance routines. Their extraordinary capabilities required constant refinement, and Mitchell understood the importance of keeping them at peak readiness. The cartel's failed attempt to steal them had only reinforced the value of their advanced training. Cypher demonstrated his problem-solving abilities during a security drill, identifying and responding to a simulated breach attempt with remarkable efficiency. The dog's intelligence and tactical awareness continued to impress visiting officials, many of whom had been skeptical about the reported capabilities of Mitchell's training program. The operation against Los Fantasmas had entered a new phase, moving from reactive response to proactive dismantling of their organization. The dogs would play a crucial role in the coming operations, their unique capabilities providing advantages that conventional forces couldn't match. The cartel was about to learn the full cost of their failed attempt to steal these extraordinary animals. In the heart of Los Fantasmas territory, the cartel's leadership gathered for an emergency meeting as their organization continued to unravel. The sophisticated boardroom, hidden within a seemingly abandoned industrial complex, buzzed with tension as regional commanders reported the growing devastation of their operations. The failed attempt to steal Mitchell's dogs had triggered a cascade of disasters that threatened to destroy everything they had built. Ramirez stood before the tactical display, watching red indicators multiply across their territory map. Each light represented another compromised asset, another broken link in their carefully constructed chain of operations. The intelligence seized during the failed dog theft had proven catastrophic, providing law enforcement with unprecedented insight into their methods and infrastructure. Elena's latest intelligence briefing painted a grim picture of their situation. "We've lost control of the northern corridors," she reported, her voice tight with tension. "Federal task forces are moving faster than we can adapt, using intelligence we didn't even know they had." The organization's legendary ability to stay ahead of law enforcement had finally met its match. The cartel's sophisticated security systems registered multiple perimeter alerts, as more vehicles arrived carrying regional commanders. Each arrival brought fresh reports of disaster. Safe houses compromised, transport routes exposed, corrupt. Officials turning themselves in rather than face the coming storm. The organization's carefully maintained facade of invincibility was crumbling. Inside the command center, senior cartel members reviewed footage from their failed operation at the truck stop. The clinical precision with which Mitchell's dogs had dismantled their security forces was even more impressive on repeat viewing. Each movement showed evidence of advanced tactical training that went far beyond anything they had encountered before. Financial reports scrolled across secondary screens, showing the devastating impact on their operations. Markets they had controlled for years were slipping away as rival organizations moved to exploit their weakness. The cost of the failed dog theft was multiplying exponentially, threatening the entire economic foundation of their empire. A junior analyst interrupted the meeting with urgent news. Another major law enforcement operation was underway, targeting key distribution hubs along the coast. The tactical display updated to show multiple breach points, each one representing another crack in their once impregnable defense network. The organization was being systematically dismantled. Ramirez studied psychological profiles of Mitchell and his team, searching for some weakness they could exploit. But the more they learned about their opponent, the more formidable he appeared. The man's military record, what they could access of it, showed a history of successful operations against seemingly impossible odds. The boardroom's atmosphere grew more tense as commanders argued over response strategies. Some advocated for immediate aggressive action, while others pushed for a complete operational shutdown to preserve what remained of their infrastructure. The disagreement reflected a deeper uncertainty about how to counter an enemy they didn't fully understand. Elena's tablet chimed with another security alert. 3 more of their top lieutenants had been arrested, caught in coordinated raids that showed evidence of insider knowledge. The organization's legendary operational security had been compromised at levels they were only beginning to understand. Their opponents seemed to know exactly where to strike for maximum effect. Satellite imagery on the main display showed increased military activity along multiple border sections. The Americans were deploying additional forces, coordinating with local law enforcement in ways that suggested long-term strategic planning. This wasn't just an opportunistic response. They had been waiting for exactly this kind of opening. The Cartel's emergency protocols, designed to protect critical assets during crisis situations, were proving inadequate against this new threat. Traditional methods of misdirection and concealment failed against opponents who seemed to anticipate their every move. The organization's playbook, refined over decades, had suddenly become obsolete. Financial experts reported massive disruptions in their money laundering networks. The intelligence seized during the failed dog theft had exposed complex financial structures that had operated undetected for years. Banks were freezing accounts, legitimate businesses were cutting ties, and the elaborate facade of respectability was rapidly disintegrating. A senior commander from the Northern Territories delivered more bad news. Their recruitment networks were collapsing as potential allies distanced themselves from the organization. The mythical aura of invincibility that had surrounded Los Fantasmas was gone, replaced by an image of vulnerability that threatened their entire operational model. Technical analysts confirmed what many had feared. Their communications networks had been compromised at a fundamental level. The encryption protocols they had relied on for secure operations were proving inadequate against whatever capabilities their opponents had deployed. Even their most sensitive channels could no longer be considered secure. Ramirez received another urgent update. Their political protection network was crumbling as corrupt officials rushed to make deals with prosecutors. The organization's carefully cultivated relationships with power brokers were dissolving in the face of unprecedented pressure from law enforcement agencies. The tactical display updated with new information about Mitchell's compound in Montana. Satellite imagery showed increased activity, suggesting preparation for additional operations. The man who had already dealt them one devastating blow appeared to be planning something even more damaging to their remaining infrastructure. Elena's intelligence team reported disturbing patterns in the ongoing law enforcement operations. The raids weren't just targeting their current activities, they were systematically dismantling infrastructure that had taken decades to build. The damage would take years to repair, if it could be repaired at all. A psychological operations expert presented his analysis of recent events, highlighting the devastating impact on their personnel's morale. The seemingly supernatural capabilities demonstrated by Mitchell's dogs had created an aura of fear that was undermining operational effectiveness at every level. The boardroom's secure servers processed new data showing the collapse of their influence in key territories. Rival organizations were already moving to fill the power vacuum, exploiting vulnerabilities that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. The carefully maintained balance of power in their world was shifting dramatically. Senior security advisors debated various counter-strategies, but each proposal seemed inadequate against the comprehensive nature of the threat they faced. Traditional responses based on intimidation and violence would only accelerate their decline against an opponent who operated on a completely different level. The organization's legendary ability to adapt and overcome challenges was being tested as never before. Each attempt to regroup or rebuild was met with precisely targeted operations that suggested their opponents could predict their moves with uncanny accuracy. The hunters had become the hunted, and they were losing ground rapidly. The meeting continued. More reports arrived, showing the extraordinary reach of the operation against them. Law enforcement agencies that had once seemed manageable through corruption or intimidation were now operating with unprecedented coordination and effectiveness. The rules of their game had changed fundamentally. Ramirez and his team faced an uncomfortable reality. They were no longer dealing with a simple security breach or temporary setback. The failed attempt to steal Mitchell's dogs had exposed them to an opponent who understood their operations at a fundamental level and possessed capabilities they couldn't effectively counter. In the pre-dawn hours at Mitchell's compound, final preparations were underway for the operation that would definitively end Los Fantasma's reign. The dogs moved with focused intensity through their pre-mission routines, each animal displaying the extraordinary discipline that had made them legendary. Ajax led his pack through precise tactical formations, while Mitchell and his team reviewed the intelligence that would guide their assault. The command center hummed with controlled energy as multiple agencies coordinated their roles in the coming operation. Satellite imagery showed increased activity at key cartel locations, suggesting their targets were exactly where intelligence had predicted. The dogs maintained their vigilant watch as federal tactical teams arrived for their final briefing. Sarah's analysis had identified the cartel's last remaining stronghold, a fortified compound deep in their territory that served as their central command center. The facility's defenses were formidable, but they had never been tested against anything like Mitchell's specialized unit. The dogs would be the key to breaching what had always been considered an impregnable fortress. Shadow and Havoc worked in tandem through final equipment checks, their movements displaying the seamless coordination that had proven so devastating during previous engagements. Each dog wore specialized tactical gear designed for their unique capabilities, combining protection with maximum mobility. Their training had prepared them for exactly this kind of high-stakes operation. Mitchell studied the compound's layout. On the main tactical display, his mind already gaming out approach vectors and breach points. The cartel's security systems were sophisticated, but they had a critical weakness. They had been designed to defend against human opponents. The dogs' unique capabilities would allow them to exploit vulnerabilities that no one had considered. Ghost moved silently through the briefing area, his pale coat barely visible in the dim light. The dog's extraordinary stealth capabilities would be crucial during the initial phases of the assault. His ability to move undetected through enemy positions had already proven devastating in previous engagements. The tactical teams watched with barely concealed awe as Cypher demonstrated advanced breach techniques during the final rehearsal. The dog's problem-solving abilities had been enhanced through years of specialized training, creating capabilities that seemed almost supernatural to traditional operators. Each movement showed perfect precision and control. Echo's distinctive warning signal cut through the pre-mission preparations, alerting everyone to approaching aircraft. Moments later, the compound sensors confirmed multiple helicopters inbound, the final elements of their assault force arriving for deployment. The dog's acute situational awareness had become a crucial part of their operational security. Inside the command center, Doc conducted last-minute health checks on the dogs, ensuring each animal was in peak condition for the coming operation. His experienced hands found nothing but readiness. Years of training and conditioning had created units that could perform at extraordinary levels under extreme conditions. The tactical displays showed multiple strike teams moving into position around Los Fantasmas territory. The operation had been coordinated across multiple agencies, with Mitchell's unit designated as the primary assault element. The dogs would spearhead the attack, using their unique capabilities to breach defenses that had stymied conventional forces. Ajax maintained his position near Mitchell as final orders were distributed, the dog's intense focus reflecting years of operational experience. Their bond had been forged through countless high-risk missions, creating a partnership that operated with almost telepathic coordination. The failed attempt to separate them had only strengthened their connection. Sparks monitored encrypted communications channels, tracking the cartel's increasingly desperate attempts to maintain control of their crumbling empire. The intelligence they had gathered allowed them to interpret every transmission, understanding not just what was being said, but the fear behind the messages. The organization's legendary confidence had been replaced by growing panic. The compound's training areas had been converted into staging zones as tactical teams made final equipment checks. The dogs moved through the controlled chaos with perfect discipline, each animal maintaining their assigned tactical position while adapting to the increased activity. Their presence had a noticeable effect on the assembled operators, inspiring confidence in the coming mission. Mitchell reviewed contingency plans with his team leaders, while Shadow maintained security overwatch. The dog's extraordinary awareness had saved lives during previous operations, detecting threats that even advanced technology had missed. His capabilities would be crucial during the complex assault they were about to launch. Havoc's powerful frame moved with controlled precision as he demonstrated key breach techniques for the tactical teams. The dog's combination of raw strength and advanced training had proven devastating in close-quarters combat. His performance during the truck stop engagement had already become legendary among law enforcement circles. The tactical displays, updated with fresh satellite imagery, showing increased defensive preparations at the Cartel compound. Los Fantasmas was clearly expecting an attack, but their preparations revealed their fundamental misunderstanding of what they were facing. They had fortified against conventional forces while remaining vulnerable to the unique capabilities of Mitchell's unit. Cypher and Echo worked through final coordination exercises, demonstrating the incredible teamwork that made them so effective. In combat situations, each dog understood their role in the larger operation, able to adapt instantly to changing tactical situations while maintaining perfect unit cohesion. Their performance reflected years of specialized training. The command center received updated intelligence from infiltrated sources within Los Fantasmas territory. The cartel's leadership was consolidating their forces around their central compound, inadvertently making themselves more vulnerable to the precise type of assault Mitchell had planned. Their desperate attempt to protect themselves had played directly into his tactical approach. Ghost's silent movement through the staging areas served as a constant reminder of the unit's extraordinary capabilities. The dog's ability to operate undetected had been crucial in previous operations, allowing them to breach security that had been considered impenetrable. His skills would be essential during the initial phases of their assault. The pre-mission briefing concluded as dawn approached, each element of the operation thoroughly rehearsed and coordinated. The dogs maintained their disciplined focus as final equipment checks were completed. Years of training had prepared them for exactly this kind of high-stakes engagement, where perfect execution would be essential for success. Mitchell led his team through their final preparations, while Ajax coordinated the other dogs' movements. The pack's incredible discipline and tactical sophistication had already proven devastating against cartel forces. Now they would demonstrate their full capabilities against the organization's most heavily defended position. The compound's sensors tracked multiple friendly forces moving into position around Los Fantasmas territory. The operation had been coordinated across federal, state, and local agencies, creating an unprecedented level of coverage. Mitchell's unit would be the tip of the spear, breaching defenses that would allow the larger force to move in and secure their objectives. Sarah's final intelligence update confirmed their tactical advantage. The cartel's attention was focused outward, expecting a conventional assault. They remained unaware of the specialized capabilities that would soon be unleashed against their positions. The dog's unique abilities would allow them to exploit vulnerabilities that no one had considered during the compound's construction. As the mission launch time approached, each dog moved to their designated position with perfect precision. There, extraordinary capabilities enhanced through years of specialized training would be the key to breaching Los Fantasmas' last stronghold. The organization that had once seemed invincible was about to face an opponent unlike anything they had ever encountered. The final assault on Los Fantasmas' compound unfolded with devastating precision. Mitchell's dogs moved like shadows through the cartel's defenses, their advanced training rendering sophisticated security systems useless. Ajax led the initial breach, with Shadow and Ghost creating diversions that drew attention away from critical entry points. Havoc's raw power, combined with Cypher and Echo's tactical coordination, systematically dismantled resistance points that had been considered impregnable. The cartel's leadership, barricaded in their command center, watched in disbelief as their defensive positions fell one by one. Years of careful planning and millions invested in security measures proved inadequate against this unprecedented threat. The dogs moved with almost supernatural coordination, their attacks precise and devastating, while avoiding lethal force. Mitchell coordinated the assault from his tactical position, his bond with the dogs allowing for perfect synchronization. Each animal executed their role flawlessly, their movements reflecting years of specialized training. The cartel's security forces, despite their professional background, found themselves completely outmatched by opponents they couldn't effectively engage. The operation culminated in the command center breach, where Ajax and Shadow's coordinated attack created an opening for federal tactical teams. Ramirez and the cartel leadership, who had once seemed untouchable, were taken into custody without a single casualty. The organization that had terrorized the border region for years was dismantled in a single, perfectly executed operation. In the aftermath, as federal agents secured the compound and processed intelligence that would lead to hundreds of additional arrests, Mitchell gathered his dogs for a final check. Each animal had performed beyond even his high expectations, demonstrating capabilities that would revolutionize tactical operations. Their success had validated years of specialized training and unprecedented investment in advanced K-9 capabilities. The operation's impact extended far beyond Los Fantasmas territory. Criminal organizations across the continent took notice, recognizing that a new era had dawned in law enforcement capabilities. The legend of Mitchell's dogs grew, serving as both inspiration for legitimate agencies and warning to those who might consider similar criminal enterprises. Back at the Montana compound, life gradually returned to normal. The dogs resumed their regular training routines, their extraordinary abilities now enhanced by real-world combat experience. Ajax maintained his leadership role, coordinating pack activities with the same precision he had shown during operations. Shadow, Ghost, Havoc, Cypher, and Echo continued to develop their specialized skills, preparing for whatever challenges the future might bring. Mitchell watched his dogs during an evening training session, reflecting on how their bond had been strengthened through adversity. The cartel's attempt to separate them had only proven what he had always known. These weren't just highly trained animals, they were family. Their loyalty, courage, and extraordinary capabilities had not only survived the ultimate test, but emerged stronger. The sun set over the Montana mountains as Mitchell and his dogs completed their evening patrol. The compound was quiet now, returned to its primary mission of advancing the boundaries of what was possible in tactical K-9 training. But the dogs maintained their vigilant watch, ready to defend their home and each other against any threat that might emerge. If you've enjoyed this incredible true story of loyalty, courage, and extraordinary capabilities, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing content. We bring you the most compelling real-life stories of heroism and adventure, featuring remarkable individuals and their unforgettable experiences. Don't miss our upcoming episodes. Hit that subscribe button now and join our community of dedicated viewers who appreciate exceptional storytelling. Remember to turn on notifications to stay updated with our latest uploads, and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us continue bringing these amazing stories to life.